Welcome, everyone. My name is Kirby Becker, and I'm your moderator today for the new Technology for Transit breakout session. I work for the Minnesota Department of Transportation in the Office of Transit and Active Transportation and supervise the IDEA unit, which stands for Innovation, Data, Evaluation, and Asset Management. One of our primary charges is to advance technology and innovative solutions for Greater Minnesota transit systems. As a result, we are currently developing a Greater Minnesota Transit Technology Plan, which will identify current technologies and gaps in solutions at the system level. And for those that heard Kelly Brookings' opening presentation, we recently received an FTA Accelerating Innovative Mobility Grant to develop a trip planning, booking, and trip tracking application for Southeast Minnesota. Before I introduce our presenters today, let's cover session logistics. This session has a Q&A element at the end. Questions should be submitted from virtual attendees through Zoom's Q&A function. Live audio will come from attendees in the Rochester Live Room following both presentations. As your moderator, I will be keeping track of questions submitted online. The first presenter will be Thomas Craig with Trillium Solutions Incorporated. Thomas joined Trillium in 2013 and has served as Trillium's CEO since 2020. He's responsible for the direction of Trillium's overall business and performance of its mission. He works with Trillium's management team to provide guidance for and coordinate between the different business lines. He's also Trillium's lead project manager for custom and large-scale software and data deployments, such as statewide general transit feed specification implementations, GTFS Flex data creation, and Open Trip Planner deployments. Thomas will be presenting today on trip planning for demand responsive transportation. The second presenter will be Marcy Jaffe with Transnovation Incorporated. Transnovation is supporting the National Rural Transit Assistance Program, General Transit Feed Specification Builder. Marcy guides transit partners with technical assistance for the General Transit Feed Specification Builder. GTFS Builder is a no-cost, simple toolkit in Microsoft Excel to generate digitized data and timetables for online trip planning in Google Transit, Apple Maps, Bing Maps, and other digital apps. GTFS Builder outputs your timetable from your website and includes features for riders to call in, as well as continuous pickup or drop-off. In 2016, the balance of Maryland's statewide digitized transit network was built on GTFS Builder at no additional cost to agencies or Maryland's DOT. Prior to Transnovation, Marcy worked at the Washington State DOT and San Francisco's Regional Planning Agency. Marcy has a Master of Public Administration and a Master of Business Administration from the University of California, Irvine, and will be presenting on National RTAP's GTFS Builder. Thomas, you're up.
Great, awesome. Thank you so much, Kirby. And I'm going to go ahead and, I have a host disabled attendee screen sharing message. Thank you all for working with the expected technical difficulty that, of course, we're happy to face within the first 2 minutes here, as opposed to randomly in the middle of the presentation. I just got a message from House Media that we're working on it. So one moment here. Thank you all. Wonderful to see a big group, over 20 attendees in the room. Awesome.
While we're waiting for technical difficulties to clear up, does anybody in the audience have any questions for Thomas and Marcy regarding GTFS Flex, GTFS Builder?
Okay, I just got the message that I'm the host now. So I will share my screen. And can we see the presentation on the screen?
We can, Thomas.
Great. Thank you, Kirby. Okay, wonderful. Well, thank you all again so much for joining us today. Both Marcy and I are going to talk about trip planning, GTFS Flex, how technology is changing to support smaller agencies, rural agencies, demand responsive agencies in providing increasingly better and better information to your customers. I'll start by talking about GTFS Flex, generally what GTFS Flex is, how it works, what the potential behind GTFS Flex is for future features. I'll start to talk a little bit more about some practical what can be done in the near term at the end of my presentation, but then hand it off to Marcy to discuss the GTFS Builder, where you could get to work building some GTFS Flex data later today if you wanted to. So we'll try to set you up with both the big picture and also some action items that you could take from this presentation and work on. You're welcome to ask questions at any time. Marcy knows she's ready to interject and let me know that there's an important question or something that I missed that should be talked about during this presentation. So if something comes up and you'd like to hear more, do feel free to, if it's a really important question you want to ask right away, do feel free to do so. We'll also, of course, take more questions and focus on those at the end. So we'll start out today with just answering the question, what is GTFS Flex? And to begin, we should really first consider, make sure everyone is on the same page about what GTFS is. Kirby, thank you so much for spelling out GTFS Flex and saying General Transit Feed Specification a few times in your introduction. That's awesome. Good to know that we're building understanding of GTFS in the state of Minnesota. GTFS is used worldwide. It is the primary data format behind transit in Google Maps. It's utilized on every continent except for Antarctica, over 7,000 cities, over 1 million different transit stops around the world. There is a lot of general transit feed specification out there. It is increasingly really the standard for how you communicate about fixed route schedules for transit services online. GTFS is also used in hundreds of apps. It's not just Google Maps that runs off of GTFS. One Bus Away, Move It, the Transit app, Bing Maps, all of these apps and more, including many, many custom applications, run off of GTFS to understand how it is that transit services work. But trip planning, this functionality that we get out of Google Maps and other transit apps, isn't available for all transit riders. Trip planning is an option for riders if there's fixed routes, fixed times when those routes run, fixed stops where those routes visit. And of course, additionally, there's other social and technological barriers to trip planning that prevent trip planning from being accessed for many users. A user needs access to the software and the hardware. If you don't have a device, a mobile phone, a tablet, a laptop computer, etc., that allow, and then the applications on it, the web browser or the app to download, then you don't actually have access to that trip planning at all. So there's a lot of barriers that mean that the transit trip planning experience is something that only some transit riders get today. And how I think about GTFS Flex is that it is a part of the mission to ensure that we provide equal access to our services, both the services on the ground and also information about those services. Because if you don't have information about the transit network and how to utilize it, then you really don't have access to the transit network itself. So we need to provide equal access to this great experience that fixed route users get today. Fixed route users with smartphones get a simple process. They enter their origin, they enter their destination, they press submit, and they get on their way, right? You get a picture of exactly how to move through the fixed route network. You're told to go to this stop, board this route, ride it to this stop, transfer there, ride it to that stop, get off, and walk to your destination. Fixed route users with smartphones get that real simple process. But other transit users don't get that real simple process. And all users, every single user, deserves equal access to trip planning. So, as I said, GTFS Flex is just a part of that mission to bring about that equal access. And it's a part that focuses on services like hail and ride services, or services with flag stops, deviated fixed route services, point deviation or checkpoint services, and zone-based or dial-a-ride services. And one of the problems that we face with these services is that many riders just don't even know that this flexible transit exists. There's many riders in the US who have access to a dial-a-ride service and don't know that that dial-a-ride service is general public, or that they meet the age or disability requirement for that service. There are many riders out there who don't know that they don't have to walk a quarter mile to that or 2 miles to that nearest bus stop. They can actually just pick that bus up along the route that it drives, just flag it down and expect to board. So the solution that GTFS Flex tries to bring about is to make those demand-responsive transit trips more discoverable. We're trying to put those services out there and notify users, let users know that those options exist, because that's the first step to actually being able to provide that equal access. It's not every step, but it's the first step. So GTFS Flex attempts to solve that by adding to GTFS service area information and locations, service times that are flexible, the expected travel speeds of these flexible services, and rider instructions, information that a rider might need or act on in order to actually board that flexible service. Because it's not just as easy as walking to a stop sometimes. Sometimes you gotta call a phone number, maybe you need to reserve a trip, maybe you need to flag down the bus as it's driving past.
Thomas, we do have a question about how this integrates with microtransit. So
yeah,
let's make sure we don't miss that as we move forward. Thank you.
Yeah, great question. And I'll just say that indeed, microtransit is a dial-a-ride service in most cases. Sometimes it's a checkpoint service, but regardless of exactly how the microtransit service is set up, it is certainly something that can be described in GTFS Flex. If there's an area or a series of locations, whether it's a number of specific checkpoint stops, or maybe certain streets that your microtransit service will pick up on, it can be described in GTFS Flex, and a microtransit service, just like a dial-a-ride service, just like a hail and ride service, or just like Uber or Lyft, could be described in GTFS Flex and could be represented in a demand-responsive GTFS Flex-based trip planner. Great question. Thanks for bringing that up, Marcy. So let's look at what this kind of actually looks like. Here's some screenshots from a GTFS Flex enabled trip planner. And in this trip, you can see that we don't just have a fixed route service that goes from one point to another at a certain time, but we actually have a dial-a-ride connection to that fixed route service. So our user is starting from an origin that is well off, a few miles off that fixed route network. And if you did this trip plan in Google, Google would say, no, there is no transit service that serves you. But that's not correct. This user can call the day before, ideally 2 days before, reserve a ride for the morning, have a dial-a-ride service pick them up at their door, bring them to the fixed route connection, and then get on their way across the state of Vermont. And we can see those data elements that we talked about. The service areas, so our start location in this image is within a service area. We have service times and speeds that calculate within this trip planner what time the pickup needs to happen in order to drop off that rider at the fixed route connection in time. And we have those rider instructions telling them exactly what number to call and the time frame before the trip that that rider needs to call. We can do other things with GTFS Flex data as well. We can display maps and show information about systems from a really high level that don't fit the fixed route paradigm. So here's, for example, a demand responsive service in Alaska, CARTS, which has a number of different dial-a-ride zones that you can travel between. The fare differs depending on which zone you're traveling between. And these various zones can be described in a GTFS Flex file. And then we can provide trip planning, or we can just provide a service overview map that is oftentimes missing from various demand responsive services. Another thing we're looking at with GTFS Flex data is to allow better visualization and analysis for DOTs, for planners to be able to understand where service exists and what the contours and horizons are where people can go with that service, whether it's fixed route or a flexible service. There's a number of projects today that utilize GTFS Flex data, and an increasing number of companies that are working and agencies that are working with GTFS Flex data. We'll talk about a few of them here. This is a website that Trillium built for a regional transit agency in the Central Valley of California, Tulare County Area Transit, or TCAT. And we installed a demand responsive trip planner within this website that shows the TCAT dial-a-ride services as well as deviated fixed route services within the context of also the various local city-based fixed route services that operate within the same region as TCAT. So now a rider can go to this ridetcat.org website, enter an origin and destination in the areas of Visalia or Porterville or Corcoran in Tulare County, and not just get the fixed route services within those cities, but actually be able to plan trips out to more rural areas of the county that are only accessible by demand responsive service.
Thomas, could you give us a time frame for TCAT as an example? Maybe there are 10 routes and then the extension of the dial-a-ride. Was it 3 weeks, 2 years? How long did it take to gather the data, proof the data, and make it go live?
Yeah, great question. This process, this was the first kind of compact GTFS Flex-based website and trip planner that we delivered last year. This whole project, including the website design, including the timetable proofing, including drawing this new logo and getting those whiskers on the cat just right, the entire project was about 5 months. The TCAT service is, I believe, 7 routes, but then there's also 5 city services that combined probably have about 40 or 50 routes. Those services, we actually just leveraged their current GTFS fixed route feeds. So we took that data that's already used in Google, and brought it into our trip planner and added the Flex data to be able to provide these extra features. The actual Flex portion of this website took maybe 4 to 6 weeks to really kind of put together and go through testing. This is something that at this point, this type of trip planner can be made pretty darn quickly, weeks, not months. Although there are some features not available in the current Flex v1 that will be available in GTFS Flex v2, which won't be available until late November, December of this year. So, there's a few variables, but broadly speaking, weeks, not months. Another example that also brings in some real-time information and payment ticket, fare payment and ticketing options and reservation options is the Vamos app, also in the Central Valley of California, in Stanislaus and San Joaquin valleys or counties. And it is an actual native app on iOS and Android. There's an open trip planner instance that Trillium hosts that is part of this technology stack, but it's actually a different company, Qt, based in Helsinki, Finland, that operates the Vamos app in collaboration with UC Davis. There are 12 transit agencies and almost about 100 routes and probably about 12 different flexible services within this trip planner. Another adaptation of this GTFS Flex data that isn't even based in a trip planner, but rather an agency website, is the use of the continuous stops or hail and ride data in order to visualize that data within route maps. So you can see here route maps for services for GATRA and MVRTA, two agencies in Massachusetts, both of which serve for all of their services in a hail and ride format, where you can pick up the bus more or less anywhere along the route, but you can see how in these drag and zoom route maps, we've actually used that GTFS Flex data to indicate the red zones of those routes where you are not allowed to flag down that bus. So a rider can go and see exactly where they're allowed to flag down a bus and those areas where they're not allowed to flag down a bus. So to wrap up and to start to hand the presentation over to Marcy, I'll talk a little bit about what you can do right now working with GTFS Flex, because there's the options of websites and maps, but for a small demand responsive system, some of those items are difficult for a single agency to achieve by itself. You'll note that that TCAT website was just one flexible agency, but there was 5 other city agencies involved there, and it's serving as a regional connector system. And there was some pooled resources from all of those agencies that made that possible. So the problems that a small dial-a-ride or paratransit provider faces today, there's no good way to allow users to book trips themselves. There are some technology platforms out there that allow you to book a trip within a paratransit system, but they're all insular systems where you just book that one trip within that one app. You can't access that through Google Maps or the Transit app or other third-party systems. There's budget limitations, and even that insular proprietary technology is pretty expensive. And it's hard to collaborate with the fixed route services that form a really important part of the transit network. So GTFS Flex, what the possible solution is here, is to have you show up in those trip planners, show up in Google Maps, show up in a statewide trip planner. But the problem is that those GTFS Flex trip planners don't yet exist. We heard from Kirby that Minnesota DOT is working through an AIM grant to possibly set up such a trip planner. which is an exciting innovation. And the next steps that I would really encourage dial-a-ride and paratransit providers to think about are, first and foremost, to complain. You and your riders should have access to trip planning too. You have every right to have equal access to the technologies that have been focused on wealthier urban environments for a long time, and certain riders that have access to certain technologies. But we have a responsibility as a society to provide access to that type of convenience for paratransit riders and for the agencies that serve them. So stating that and calling on DOTs and others to invest in tools that help you provide better service to your riders is a great next step. GTFS Flex is a partial solution. We haven't talked about real-time information for flexible transit services, which is not part of GTFS Flex. GTFS Flex is about showing what's possible. It's about the discovery of these flexible services. But we also then need booking software that would allow the integration of, say, Google Maps or Transit app into your booking application to allow riders to actually not, call to schedule that trip, but just buy now a ticket and have that demand responsive service show up a few minutes later. And to think about, what is that coalition that you can form with other agencies in your region? Some of these things are tough to achieve as a single small transit agency, but if you get your county, you get the city next door, you get a number of other small providers within a region to work together, these programs become much more achievable. So thinking of how you can organize with others is a great next step as well. We've already had a couple of questions, and I haven't looked at the clock, but I suspect I'm running long. So I'm going to go ahead and hand the mic over to Marcy, and we'll start with her presentation, and then we can come back to more questions on this later on if y'all have them. Thank you. Oh, yep.
Thomas, you'll proceed with the slides for me so I don't have to. Yeah,
that's
thank
correct.
you.
Yep. Yeah.
Well, Kirby, thank you for welcoming us, and hello, Minnesota. We are thrilled to be here with you. National RTAP is working on an interim solution, and one that will put you in good stead for the future AIM grant and any other innovations, because the data needs to be standardized in order to get integrated into the wonderful toolkits that Thomas has been reviewing with you. So I do hope you'll start putting your questions together. Next slide. So what we do at National RTAP is take down the veil on GTFS and help you understand that it is possible to use simple Excel spreadsheets and build your data. I'm going to show a few examples of what those spreadsheets look like, but a first step that we take is to use a shared map, and what you see on the right there are just popping your bus stops onto the map with some precision so that the rider would know where to stand and wait for the bus, or in the cases where Thomas explained, these are not hail ride stops. They're available only to fixed and not flex. So whatever information we need there, we can build into our GTFS file. And next slide, please. This is how simple it is to build your GTFS schedules workbook. You're looking at what route is involved, what time it departs, where it leaves from. If you don't have intermediate times for a stop, it's an on-time stop, we just put in an asterisk to hold that as a placeholder. So this is just a portion of the schedules workbook, but gives you a chance to see what it looks like to have a GTFS file built in our no-cost tools. Next slide. Some of the other details that go into GTFS, although this is not the entire set of details, include a calendar when you do not have service. So an exception type that said on Memorial Day or Labor Day or Thanksgiving, we don't have service. And these colored tabs that you see across the bottom of the screen, agency, calendar, calendar dates, routes, all of those coordinate with a file that's used in the general transit feed specification. So those points on the map that we had in the prior screen that showed you you're collecting your bus stops, those get dropped in, literally copy paste into the stops tab, and then you would have all of your lat long, which are the geocoding, the location of the maps, in a format that lets it become digitized and screen reader friendly. Next screen, please. So in the interim, while all of the ducks come together that Kirby is working toward at the state level, we want to have an interim Flex GTFS builder. So many of you as operators, thank you, you can go to the next screen. So many of you as operators really do want to see your services live sooner than later, may not have a huge budget. And then as the statewide deployment rolls in, you'll be first in line because your data will be ready to go. So here's an example right now, just the data side, because we want you to see that it is possible with our Excel spreadsheets to develop an interim, a working flex ride, dial-a-ride service. And recently Google has offered and allowed, through Thomas and his team's very passionate focus, that this needs to be added to the specification, columns J and beyond there to say continuous pickup and continuous drop off. So we know that it is important to start to see columns J and K come alive. And this will allow, as you can see in our next slide, a service area to be created. You know what it is. And so you can place as many or as few bus stops as you want. You're now creating the semblance of a route, that maybe the buses do go north-south, or maybe they go east-west. We certainly know they go everywhere. But in the spirit of discovery, if we can go to the next slide, we now have in a rural part of Washington State an opportunity for the discovery, which was really the purpose of this conversation. How does a rider find out that there is a service and then call in? And we're able to highlight in there that the rider should call for a pickup 24 hours ahead. Don't call right away. We can't be certain you'll get the trip. But this allows for the discovery and possibility that a rider learns about, and then in the future, they probably don't go to Google Maps to plan the trip in order to find out that it is possible to make the phone number and call ahead.
Hey, Marcy.
Yes.
I've got a question from
Please,
one of
Kirby.
from somebody attending. Does GTFS require GIS, or specifically Esri, which could be cost prohibitive for small systems, or simply Excel, Google Maps plus Earth?
Thank you. An excellent question. It is required that you have Google Earth on your computer, not required that you have Esri or any other proprietary software. And so we literally use My Maps to draw the shapes line, which allowed for a display of the bus route on the road. And while we love our team that has the expertise in GIS, they can be consulted, they can be available, but it's people like myself. I am not a GIS expert, but I have been passionate about making sure that it is possible for anyone who wants to take the few minutes to go click, click. These are the lines on the map that I want to connect, and maybe I need to wiggle the line a little bit for the route map. And then we download that KML, the file, into the Excel spreadsheet. And then it marries that data and builds the GTFS with a GIS layer. So thank you for that question.
Yep. I have one other follow-up question, and this
Please.
is actually from me. So thinking about GIS, so we have RTCCs in Minnesota. They're Regional Transportation Coordinating Councils. And many of them are looking at developing a GIS system that incorporates all of the transportation within their regions. Would you say that a DBF that's typically associated with a GIS shapefile or layer for transportation and or transit services would resemble the GTFS builder Excel column titles?
All good questions. You can export your DBS file to create a shape line, but the back end, if we went 2 or 3 slides earlier, which we don't need to do, there's a schedule, and there's quite a few little data details that go along with that schedule. You have to show the next stop in your GTFS file. You have to, assign whether it's going to be wheelchair accessible or not wheelchair accessible. You could try to do all of this, and I think that ESRI has some tools for working with GTFS files, and you'd want to work with them to see how current they are. We're doing our best at National RTAP to add things like continuous stop and continuous pickup to be sure that these features don't get missed, and maybe they're getting picked up in the shapes files available there. And Thomas, do you want to jump in on anything that's ESRI integration?
Yeah, I was just gonna, to restate exactly what you said, Marcy, GTFS is really a richer data format than GIS that includes more information, not just that geospatial information, but also the really important temporal information. Because it's very different if a bus comes to a stop, once every 60 minutes as opposed to once a day. Those are two very, very different situations. That temporal information is absolutely critical. And what I would say is, GIS really is a subsection of the GTFS data. GTFS is richer, and it's also easier to maintain in many ways with cheaper tool sets. Marcy and RTAP have a free tool set. Trillium has a low-cost tool set. So it's actually cheaper than Esri to maintain GTFS data. And then while you can't take Esri data and make GTFS out of it, you can take GTFS and make Esri data out of it. So I would say, why even focus on maintaining a county-wide GIS data layer when you can focus on maintaining a county-wide GTFS file, take your GIS data from it anytime you want, but then also get Google Transit out of it?
Thank you, Kirby, for the question, because this is why technology keeps moving, and then sometimes people are very beholden to where they've been coming from, and they say, we've got to hold on to this. We've always done it this way. There really is an opportunity to marry and do some excellent data integration, and thank you, Thomas, for sharing that. So we're going back to the example in Washington State, this rural community. They offer a lot of fixed route, but in this one particular community where we showed that shape area, we offer a flex service open to anyone, and the discovery is there. So riders will call in and plan their trip. Next screen, please. So a lot of times when we hear about GTFS, we think, oh, let's just put a device on the bus, and a vehicle locator device on the bus, and we're done. If the bus can be found on a map somewhere, then it generates a GTFS file, it does everything, it's amazing, and we jump the line. Well, yes and no, it is amazing, because it was certainly something we didn't have many years ago. And we're going to focus a little bit on one of your neighbors at Metro. Next screen, please. Where a piece of the puzzle is that the automated vehicle locator, the AVL on the bus, will allow that rider, if it gets integrated with GTFS static, which is what we've been talking about, the scheduled services are the static services, and that real-time information gets integrated, you would see something like this. This is Oklahoma City, and I help manage for them a real-time data layer, not related to National RTAP, not at zero cost, but takes the data from that device on the bus and allows the rider to see, ooh, that connection's going to be 2 minutes late. Maybe I won't make the transfer I need. I'll need to connect to a different bus, and my trip plan actually updates automatically with the AVL information when it is married with the static information. But the highlight here is that second bullet. Many of the AVL at this time don't out of the box generate real-time information at Google Maps. Not to say that they don't generate it. It's that it is not integrated with Google Maps. So were you to go out for a deployment or an opportunity to purchase this service, please be sure you include in your procurement what examples they have of that data integration. We believe that that's quite important. So let's look at one innovation in your neighborhood for transit clock. On the next screen, there's a group that's putting an open source set of tools together, and they were being tested. and they used your neighbors in Metro to test against the other proprietary available services. And while this chart and map you'd have to stare at for a few minutes, what you would see is if you look on the date of October 24th, they had an event, as you can see in the protest screens, related to a sports activity. Doesn't matter what the details are, but which of the lines were closer to the top, 85% toward 100% actual situation of what was happening on the ground. And the transit clock was able to pick up that information using the information that it does on the back end called this Kalman filter in order to better improve the display of actual information when you have real-time information, this AVL on the bus. So we wanted to show that you really are innovators there in Minnesota, and this was one example. So next screen, please. If you'd like to learn more about that, that is not my personal project, but here's some information. And when these slides become available, please reach out to your Metro staff or the group at transitclock.org. Next screen. So upcoming, National RTAP has realized that many times an agency said, I'm interested in GTFS, I want to move forward. And then they go to try to fill out a data license agreement and the project slows down, stops, doesn't happen. And it's not the data. I promise you, we can do the data. And unfortunately, there's been some confusion. So in about 3 weeks, October 27th, about the same time of day, we're going to be holding an opportunity for you and all to ask your questions and hopefully submit those questions in advance so we can have our attorney, who's a member of our team that will be presenting that day, discuss license agreements and what slows us down. Next screen. And I'm here for questions as well. So between Kirby, Thomas, and myself, we'll do our best to make sure today is a day that relieves you of why am I not moving forward on GTFS?
Thank you, Marcy, for the wonderful presentation. Thank you, Thomas, for your presentation. At this time, we'll take any sort of questions that might be in the live room. I'm looking at an image of the live room. It doesn't look like there's too many people in the room. I don't see anybody, but we will take the online. Oh, there's a couple. There we go. We got 3 people. So if any of you have questions in the room, feel free to pose those questions, or anybody virtually type within the chat and we'll answer your questions at this time.
Looks like we got one question for you there, Kirby. Snapshot of the Southeast Minnesota project.
I can. So the Accelerating Innovation and Mobility, the FTA grant that we were recently awarded, it's roughly, I think it was $628,000 that was awarded from FTA. And there is roughly 8 public transport providers and a myriad of private transportation providers within the Southeast region, which includes both Mankato and Rochester. And as part of that project, I'm going to be very high level here because I'm not the project manager, but I do oversee Elliot McFadden, who works in our office and is in the IDEA unit, is the project manager for that project, is working on putting together an RFP and modifying the scope for that RFP. And we're hoping to have that RFP out sometime in November. And as part of the RFP, we are going to be building a GTFS Flex system as the first piece, and then it eventually will make itself into basically a trip planner for all of the region. So I'm just trying to keep it very high level at this time. So that's kind of essentially what we're doing. Thanks for your question, Mark. And hello, Mark, by the way.
Maybe I could ask a question to the group because we only have a few more minutes, but what has slowed some of these agencies down from pursuing GTFS? So maybe Kirby, could you ask that question from the state perspective to your agencies that have some fixed routes, please?
Are you asking me to respond or ask the question?
Ask the question because
Ask the
I'm an
question.
outsider. I'm offering free tools. I want to ask why the state or you. So let's have that conversation if we can.
I think I don't know if any of the 5307s, the small urbans, are participating today. It'd be interesting. I think right now, the current climate with the pandemic and everything that's happening, I think that in itself is obvious, probably why the systems aren't pursuing the GTFS now. But in the past, I think if we had to ask some of the small urbans why they haven't, well, a few of them are, and they do have GTFS out there and available. But why all of them aren't? It's primarily staffing resources. And that's, I think our office realized that several years ago when we went through a reorg, and that's why management at the top level decided to create this idea unit. And we're here to advance GTFS and GTFS Flex on a statewide level. And our desire is to have an online web-friendly procurement system and to have a statewide trip planner eventually long-term. So I think that maybe that answers the question.
That's fine.
There's a question here from Daryl Washington. Great question about automating the process of figuring out exactly where the pickup and drop-off locations are for flexible services. And that is something that is not quite solved by GTFS Flex itself, and not quite yet, but is on the near-term roadmap for GTFS Flex-based projects. At this time, GTFS Flex really is about that discovery stage. It's about, I'm starting here, I want to get to here, and in response, the trip planner will provide you with a trip plan that says, well, okay, you want to board this service from your current location and take it to this transfer point to get on the fixed route network. But the current, today's GTFS Flex trip planners just tell you what that trip should look like if you were to go about it. What's missing right now is the next step of basically a buy now or book now or ride now button, where you click, yes, I want that trip right now. And then the van or the car or the bus or whatever vehicle is operating that trip shows up 5, 15, 30 minutes later. And all the information is in the system. The origin location, the pickup location is in the system. The next step that needs to happen is for that trip planner to be able to take that data, that trip plan that it's created, and call to a booking system that's operating your service and your demand responsive scheduling locally, and say, excuse me, booking system, I would like a trip that fits these parameters as soon as possible. Please dispatch that vehicle. And then the booking system to respond back and say, A-OK, we got it. Vehicle's on its way. And that system requires a real-time communication between the trip planner and your local demand responsive scheduling system that can be done today. It's something that exists. It's the same feature that you get in like the Lyft or Uber app, right? So it does exist today from a technological perspective, but it only exists in insular systems where private companies own that data the entire way through the system. and describe that data, including that real-time handshake between those two systems in a proprietary format that Marcy's company, my company, National RTAP, were not allowed to build more data in those types because someone has put a patent on it and said, no, you're not allowed to book in real time according to this algorithm. But we're working on that. We're working through a few projects right now. An innovative mobility initiative grant also funded by the FTA in the VAMOS project in Central California, and hopefully soon through an ITS for US grant that California, Oregon, and Washington together put a bid on. That was the tap you heard was me knocking on wood a second ago. To define a standard for how that communication between those systems would work in open systems, and also to build an open source booking application that small agencies would be able to leverage locally to automate that booking and scheduling within their system. So all the information is there, Daryl. We're working on that feature because that's really what this has to go. But it's been important to start from the discovery stage and to start from building a platform where any agency can get involved. Because what we don't want is a couple of mega corporations to own every single public transit system in the United States and be able to take 10 or 20 or whatever percent it wants off the top of every one of those transactions. What we want is your local agencies to be able to own your technology stack and be able to, if there's a new agency that's just starting up, for it to be able to, at minimal cost, get into that same platform that Minnesota or another state has put together. So that's the kind of path we're taking. And certainly it's, within the next year or two type of goal to have that functionality. We're just not quite there yet.
I'm going to jump in because I partly see that question of, does it save anybody time if we put all this energy into generating some digitized information? And unfortunately, we're not really paid to come back and say, hey, did this save you time? But I do have some examples where agencies before COVID had just paper schedules, they did everything right, and they had ridership. Then I see over months and years that their ridership is requiring and justifying that they go back to their state DOT and say, we need more money, we have more buses. And I'm quite sure they didn't have a whole bunch of more phone team saying, when is the bus leaving? Where does it go? How do I get there? So I think we do have examples. We may not have them pinpointed, maybe Thomas does, but definitely over time, you do have a cost savings on riders discovering your service, using your service, being able to integrate it between communities. And I didn't mention in today's conversation, but we can publish this data in German or French or Spanish, Title VI languages. So when the FDA comes back to you during triennial review and said, gee, how do you manage low English proficiency? You would say, hey, our trip planner is available in not just the minimum 5% languages that we're required to have, but any language that those riders need to come in and plan a trip. Now, we don't need a translation service for those individuals. They can have it native on their phone or device in their language. So there's actually a lot of things happening in the background that we didn't focus on today that are cost and time savings. So I appreciate you asking. Another question from Mark that I would like to make a quick comment on. The transit clock is not live yet at Metro. It was during a test, and it will become live for Metro on their back end. It's at this point not being integrated with the Google Map experience. You'll want to talk to them about that, but it's in process from Transit Clock, from what I understand.
And I'm monitoring the clock. I want to respect everybody's time, so we have about 3 minutes left. There is one more question from Ted Nelson with Prairie 5 Rides. He says, I'm wondering if you know of demand response systems that are able to work with GTFS.
Sorry, I just kicked it off your screen by answering it.
Yeah. So he says, to work with GTFS, it seems like this will work well with fixed routes or deviated routes, but demand response, I am not sure how this would work. So maybe if you both want to speak to that.
To my knowledge, there is only one actual demand responsive scheduling company that does the full stack of scheduling services for demand response and also publishes GTFS Flex data. It's a company that neither Marcy or I, own or operate. It's called Demand Trans. I believe they're based in Chicago. It is a company that I've done some subcontracting work for, but they're their own company and have picked up this service. And then, of course, Trillium makes GTFS Flex, and National RTAP makes GTFS Flex. So there's kind of three companies that are working within this space. Demand Trans, though, technically is the only one that actually provides like the full scheduling system along with that GTFS Flex feature.
And to Ted's question, we actually have to do a little bit of a workaround to get it to go live because Google wants only fixed schedules. So we develop a fixed route. And then once we are live at Google, we add our bells and whistles that allow for GTFS Flex. So it's a very valid question. If you have looked into it before, you were probably told no, but that's not the only answer. So thank you for asking. Well, thank you so much to everyone for joining us today.
Yep.
We're thrilled that you were here, and we'll hope it gets your mind thinking for the future and be ready for the innovations available in Minnesota upcoming.
And as the moderator, I want to personally thank everyone for attending today, and I want to give a special thanks to Thomas and Marcy for their presentations and the insights on GTFS Flex and the National RTAP GTFS the builder. It's a mouthful to say that. I also want to let those that are attending virtually know that you can attend the expo virtually, and I did it just before this session started, and it's really cool. It's actually, if you go to the Minnesota the MPTC website it has a link for using this app called Gatherly. And then you can actually go from booth to booth and you can talk virtually with the vendors. So I encourage those that are attending virtually to take some time and go and visit with the vendors that are part of the expo. Again, as Margaret mentioned at the beginning of the conference, without the support of the vendors and other consultants out there that provide some of the funding, this would not happen. And I think you should check out some of the cool innovations that they have going on. So thank you everyone for attending.
Thank you.
Appreciate
Thanks,
it.
everyone. Have a great rest of your day.
You too. Thanks.